This is the second part of the conflict question. So remember that in the first part I said that the question, tell me about a time that you had a conflict situation, tell me about a time you had a disagreement with someone. The answer to this question would vary depending on who the conflict is with. So in other words, if the conflict was with your coworker, your answer would be a little different if the conflict is with your boss, and again it would be different if the conflict is with an external client. Okay, so but the first thing is, in all of these three scenarios, the one thing that is common, that should be common to your answer, is pick an example that is not personal. Okay, so remember that this is a tell me about a time behavioral question. So obviously the way you answer this is by picking a real life example, and you want to make sure that you're steering clear of picking anything that is too personal. That's really critical with these questions around conflict and disagreements, because this is precisely what they're trying to test for. At least one of the things they're trying to test for is that you're not somebody who gets into unnecessary personal disagreements and conflicts with people in your work environment. Okay, so very, very important. Don't pick something that has to do with personality conflicts or disagreements over work methods, or just kind of like not getting along with people. You want to come across as someone who is easy to work with, and that you are efficient and effective, and that you're someone who focuses on getting the job done. Okay, all right, so having said that, so like I said, there are these three different scenarios, and the answer is a little different. So probably the best way to explain this is by picking an example, right? So let's pick an example that would work for all three scenarios, and then let's see how we would tweak it in each of those three scenarios. So let's say that your company is trying to break into a new market, and there are two different ways to go about it: strategy A versus strategy B. Let's say strategy A is through something like a joint venture with a local company. Strategy B is directly selling into that market. So the conflict or the disagreement is over these two strategies. So let's say that you've done your analysis, you've run the model, done your numbers, and your recommendation is strategy A. But your colleague says that according to her analysis that she would go with strategy B. So there's your conflict, strategy A versus strategy B. So with your colleague, the way you would handle this is, to keep it obviously very, very clean, very simple, and you would both sit down together and you would run the numbers and run the analysis, and hopefully both of you comparing notes, comparing it the way you've tackled the data, should come to some sort of conclusion. And if you couldn't, then you might say something like, you looked for a third-party opinion, you sought out maybe somebody with a little bit more experience, expertise, and asked them to step in and help out. You could also say, although I would be a little careful with this, you could say that both of you couldn't really come to an agreement, so you went to your manager with both analyses and asked for some clarity. The only thing with that you have to be careful is that it doesn't sound like when you have a disagreement with a coworker or a colleague that that you run to your boss for the boss to sort it out for you. Okay, so that's the first scenario. Now the second scenario, let's say it's exactly the same thing, strategy A versus strategy B, but the disagreement is with your boss. So you have been tasked to make this analysis. You do it, you go to your boss and you say, I think we should go with the joint venture strategy. And your boss seems surprised and seems to think that it's pretty obvious that you should go the other route, the strategy B. So here, the way the disagreement is with your boss. So it's very important to distinguish the key defining piece here. This is the person that you report to, right? It's your boss. So you have to bring in an additional piece of diplomacy and tact, maturity and self-awareness to any potential conflict that you might have with your boss. So you might obviously again, say, look, let's run the numbers again. Let's look at the data. I just want to be very careful that I'm suggesting strategy A for a reason. I'm pretty confident that I've done the right analysis, but let me take a look at that again. And can you please take me through your justifications for why you think it should be strategy B. And so that way, your boss, has some respect for you because you didn't just cave in and say, okay, you had some confidence behind your analysis and you, wanted to defend that. But if the conflict question is with your boss, then you want to end that answer with something along the lines of, look, ultimately at the end of the day, this is my boss and he's my boss for a reason. So, if this disagreement continued and we really couldn't come to an agreement on how to proceed based on data and numbers and facts, well then, in the final analysis, I would defer to my boss's decision. All right, so third and final scenario with the client. Again, with the client, the piece that you want to bring into this is that it's a client. So typically, that's ultimately who pays the bills, right? Clients are important. Long-term relationships with them are critical for most businesses. So you want to mention, again, tact and diplomacy in the answer to the conflict with the client. You sort of want to hit a sweet spot here between, again, if you've done your analysis correctly, you need to be able to defend that. You need to be able to explain that in a gentle but firm way to your client, because you also don't want to just agree with whatever the client wants and then they end up making a very costly mistake, right? Because then in any event you're going to be held responsible. So you do want to be able to stick by why you think strategy A is what you chose, and take the client through your reasoning. But then, like with the previous example, you mentioned something along the lines of, this is a key account for us. This client is important, and we worked very, very closely with them until we could come to some sort of compromise situation that was agreeable to the client and that we felt comfortable as a professional firm advising them. We felt comfortable with that path. All right, so that's it for the conflict question. Look us up on the website for more tips and strategies. Thank you.